In the mid-1800s, a farmer bought land in northern Louisiana. He cleared fields. He planted crops. His children grew up there. When he died, they buried him in that same soil. The farmers who came after him did the same thing. For generations, nobody noticed. Until someone looked a little more closely at that land. Beneath the plows. Beneath the fields where children ran and played. A 3,400-year-old city was hiding. While Stonehenge was being built, while Egyptian pharaohs sat on their thrones, the people who lived on these grounds had constructed the largest structure North America had ever seen, using nothing but their hands and woven baskets. We don't know who they were. We don't know where they went. We don't know why they built it. Today, are you ready to solve this urban legend that has been buried in Louisiana soil for 3,400 years? Picture northeastern Louisiana. Flat, wide, fertile land. A floodplain shaped by the sediment the Mississippi River carried for centuries. For the European settlers who arrived here in the early 1800s, this land meant one thing. It was perfect for farming. And that is precisely why a secret thousands of years old nearly stayed hidden forever. The farming families who settled this region in the mid-1800s occasionally noticed strange things turning up in their soil as they worked their fields. Small clay balls, stone tools, carved bones. But they didn't take these seriously. Old Native American leftovers, they said. They tossed the objects aside or ignored them, and they went back to plowing. The area gradually became known as Poverty Point Plantation, a name that came from one of the landowners of the 19th century. Poverty Point. An unfortunate name, isn't it? One of the most significant archaeological sites in the world, named after an ordinary plantation. In 1873, a former Confederate Army officer named Samuel Lockett passed through the region and noted some unusual earthen ridges. He recorded that they might be artificial, but nobody took him seriously. In 1913, the renowned archaeologist Clarence B. Moore investigated the site. He dug. He found peculiar objects. But he couldn't grasp the true scale of the structure, because he couldn't see it. And that brings us to the central question. Why couldn't he see it? The answer is as simple as it is staggering. The structure was so large that a person standing on the ground could never take it in. The year was 1953. Only 8 years had passed since the end of World War II. America had built military bases across the world, and wartime technology had pushed aviation to extraordinary new heights. As a result, aerial photographs of nearly every corner of the country had been taken. In 1953, a group of researchers were reviewing an aerial photograph of northern Louisiana that had been taken roughly 20 years earlier, around 1933. It was routine work, just one photograph among dozens. And then someone stopped. There was something in the photograph. Shadows, earthen ridges, regular, geometric, parallel lines. The researcher placed the photograph flat on the table and looked more carefully. There, in the middle of the Louisiana wetlands, 6 enormous concentric, semicircular earthen ridges stretched out in perfect symmetry, spaced at equal distances from one another, arranged with unmistakable precision. This was not something nature had created. The researcher placed both hands on the table and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to a colleague and said, "I believe these are man-made." In that instant, the history of North American archaeology changed forever. Because when the dimensions of the structure visible in that aerial photograph were calculated, the numbers were almost impossible to believe. The diameter of the outermost semicircle, 1,140 meters, over 1 kilometer across. For comparison, Stonehenge spans roughly 100 meters in diameter. The outer ridge of Poverty Point is more than 11 times wider. And this structure had only become visible through an aerial photograph taken 2 decades earlier. Before that, who knows how many archaeologists, how many farmers had walked across these grounds. But none of them had seen it. Because to see it, you needed to rise into the sky. So who had built this? When archaeologists began their investigations, their first findings exceeded every expectation. The estimated construction period, approximately 1700 BCE to 1100 BCE, roughly 3,400 to 3,700 years ago. Let's put those dates in context. 1700 BCE. This is when Egypt's new kingdom was just beginning. Tutankhamun hadn't been born yet. The Hittite Empire was rising in what is now Turkey. Babylon stood at the peak of its power in Mesopotamia. And during this very same era, in the wetlands of Louisiana, a structure unlike anything the world had ever seen was being built. So who were these people? Archaeologists gave them a simple name: the Poverty Point culture. Because no other name exists. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what gods they worshipped. But there are things we do know, and these things make everything even more mysterious. These people were hunter-gatherers. They didn't practice agriculture. They hadn't domesticated animals. They hadn't established permanent settlements, or at least, that's what we assumed. Because history had always taught us one thing: great structures are built by great civilizations. And great civilizations begin with farming and settled life. Poverty Point shattered that assumption. People who didn't farm, who had no wheels, no domesticated animals, no written language, built the largest structure North America had ever seen. How was this possible? Let's talk numbers, because numbers tell this story better than words can. The amount of earth moved during the construction of Poverty Point: 53 million cubic feet. Don't let that number stay abstract. Modern engineers ran the calculations. 53 million cubic feet of soil weighs approximately 1.9 million tons. That's the equivalent weight of 288,000 African elephants. And the tool used to move all of it? 50-pound baskets. Nothing else. No horse-drawn carts, no wheeled vehicles. Just human backs and hand-woven baskets. Now here's the truly staggering part. According to calculations by archaeologist John Gibson, the main earthwork known as Mound A, a massive ridge 72 feet tall and 710 feet long, is estimated to have been constructed in somewhere between 30 and 90 days. 30 to 90 days. With today's construction technology, with today's machinery, building this mound would take months. And these people completed it in a matter of weeks, using only their hands and their baskets. How? Archaeologists offer one answer: an extraordinarily organized community, a leadership structure, division of labor, a shared collective will. But there's a problem with that explanation. No evidence of hierarchy has ever been found at Poverty Point. No palace, no royal tomb, no specialized structures indicating an elite class. Everyone appeared to live in similar conditions in the same area. So what was it that brought these people together? What drove them to accomplish this monumental shared undertaking? That question remains one of the greatest mysteries in this entire story. But before we get to that, there's something else we need to discuss. Because it wasn't just the construction of Poverty Point that stunned the world. Its trade network did too. Archaeologists excavating Poverty Point found thousands of objects: stone tools, clay balls, decorative items, figurines, beads, carved jewelry. And as they examined these objects, they noticed something deeply strange. The raw materials used to make them didn't exist anywhere near Poverty Point. Not a single one. When researchers traced the origins of the stones found at Poverty Point, what they uncovered shocked the historical community. Some stones came from the Ouachita Mountains, roughly 250 miles away. Some came from the Ozark Mountains, about 300 miles. Some came from the Ohio and Tennessee River valleys, between 400 and 450 miles away. And then there was the most extraordinary finding of all. Certain objects had been carved from soapstone originating in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, in what is now northern Alabama and Georgia. That's more than 500 miles away. No horses, no wheels, no motorized transport. Over 500 miles. These people were transporting raw materials across half a continent by hand and by canoe, thousands of years before anyone imagined such a thing was possible. This could not have happened by chance. Poverty Point was the center of one of the oldest and most sophisticated trade networks the ancient world had ever seen. Think about what that means. More than 3,400 years ago, networks were operating along the Mississippi River. Different communities were trading with one another across vast distances. And at the very center of that network, in the wetlands of Louisiana, stood Poverty Point. So who were the architects of this trade network? Who managed an organization this sophisticated? No written record, no language we can decipher, no names. Only objects remain. And objects, even thousands of years later, still speak. We need to talk about one specific group of objects found at Poverty Point, because they tell us more about these people's inner world than almost anything else that's been discovered here. Archaeologists named them formally Poverty Point objects, PPOs for short. Thousands of them have been found, different sizes, different shapes, some spherical, some cylindrical, some in specialized forms called bimaroids, all made of fired clay, all roughly the size of a human palm. What are they? Cooking stones. There were no natural stone sources around Poverty Point, but these people still needed to cook their food. Under normal circumstances, natural stones would be heated in a fire and placed beneath food to cook it. But there were no stones here. So these people created their own solution. They made cooking stones from clay. Handcrafted, self-designed, in dozens of different geometric shapes. And the variety of those shapes was not accidental. Different forms distributed heat differently during cooking. These people were practicing heat engineering 3,400 years ago, before stone tools became widespread in the region, before any written record, but not before ingenuity. Archaeologists say this about these objects: nowhere else in the world has anything like these cooking stones been found. This technique, this design philosophy, this variety, is entirely unique to Poverty Point. These people weren't just construction engineers. They were materials engineers. They were designers. They were inventors. And they accomplished all of this without ever writing a single word down. Among the objects found at Poverty Point, there is one group that gives us the most powerful glimpse into the inner lives of these people: figurines. female figurines in particular. Small, detailed human forms carved from clay or stone. Alongside them, animal figurines, owls, eagles, frogs, water birds. The owl figurines carved from red jasper stand out above all. The craftsmanship in these pieces is so refined, so intricate, that when archaeologists first saw them, they paused. These people understood beauty. They valued art. Artistic expression was not a luxury for them. It was a necessity. According to archaeologists, these figurines are believed to have served more than decorative purposes. They almost certainly carried spiritual or ceremonial meaning. The owl image, in particular, is connected across many Native American cultures to death, transition, and the world beyond. So what did these people believe? Where did they think they went when they died? The answer to that question connects directly to one of Poverty Point's greatest mysteries. Because at Poverty Point, not a single grave has ever been found. This is one of the findings that has puzzled archaeologists most deeply. For 600 years, hundreds, possibly thousands, of people lived in this area. So where were their dead buried? In nearly every other ancient culture across the southeastern United States, burial mounds are a defining feature. People buried their dead with valuable possessions, carefully prepared inside earthen mounds. At Poverty Point, nothing. Not one skeleton has ever been recovered. How do you explain that? Some archaeologists offered this theory. Perhaps the dead were carried elsewhere. Poverty Point may not have been a permanent settlement. Perhaps people came here for gatherings, for ceremonies, for trade, but didn't actually live here. Others argue the exact opposite. Perhaps people did live here, but released their dead into the water, into the Mississippi tributaries of the region, and the river carried everything away. Nobody knows. But the absence of burials tells us something else. For these people, Poverty Point was more than just a place to live. This site may have carried a sacred meaning that went beyond the everyday. And that brings us to the deepest question in this entire story. For 90 years, archaeologists have been asking this question. Why was Poverty Point built? There is still no definitive answer, but there are theories. And the fact that these theories are so different from one another shows just how profound the question really is. Theory 1. Trading hub. The oldest and most widely accepted explanation. Poverty Point was the region's greatest center of commerce. People traveled from hundreds of miles away to gather here. The semicircular earthen ridges were constructed to accommodate these massive gatherings. This theory is strong. The existence of the trade network is definitively proven. But there's a problem. Would a structure this large, this complex, really have been built for trade alone? Theory 2. Ceremonial and ritual grounds. Some archaeologists argue that Poverty Point was a sacred site where people gathered for annual or seasonal ceremonies. The figurines, the art objects, and especially the complete absence of burials support this reading. But this theory has its own weakness. If this was purely a ceremonial space, why was a structure this enormous necessary? Would a ceremony truly require this scale? Theory 3. Astronomical observatory. Some researchers have proposed that the main structures of Poverty Point align with specific astronomical events, the rising and setting points of the sun at the solstices. If that's true, these people may have built this structure to observe the sky, to track the seasons, and perhaps to establish a connection with the heavens above. Theory 4. Building community identity. A different group of archaeologists suggests something entirely unexpected. Perhaps the purpose of building Poverty Point mattered more than the building itself. In other words, the act of coming together to build something, doing shared work, forging a shared identity, sweating together, may have been the real goal. Some communities build great projects not because they need the result, but because the act of building holds them together. Theory 5. Repairing a torn universe. This is the newest and most striking theory of all. In research published in 2025, archaeologist T.R. Kidder from Washington University and his team proposed something entirely different. When Poverty Point was being constructed, the southeastern United States was experiencing severe weather and catastrophic flooding. Nature was unpredictable. Human life was under threat. According to Kidder, these people didn't build Poverty Point for a practical purpose. They built it out of a spiritual necessity, to repair the universe, to appease the anger of nature, to restore balance with invisible forces. The soil they carried was not a technical achievement. It was a cry, and it was a prayer. And there is something that strengthens this theory further. Kidder spent years in conversation with numerous Native American communities, including members of the Lumbee tribe. In those communities, a belief still lives on. The earth is sacred. To move the earth is to shape the universe. The people of Poverty Point may have been doing exactly that. Repairing the universe with their bare hands. The 6 semicircles visible in the 1953 aerial photograph represented Poverty Point's known architecture for decades. Archaeologists spent years studying those 6 ridges, several mounds, and the central plaza. But in the 2000s, something changed. LiDAR technology entered the picture. LiDAR uses laser pulses to detect structures beneath the surface, a technology that has revolutionized the field of archaeology. And when it was applied to Poverty Point, researchers discovered something new. Beyond the outermost known ridge, beneath the soil, lay previously undetected additional structures. Larger, older, and not yet fully understood. Less than 1% of Poverty Point has been excavated to date. 99% of it remains beneath the earth. What else is waiting down there? Nobody knows. 1100 BCE, approximately 3,100 years ago. Poverty Point was suddenly and completely abandoned. For 600 years, there had been life here. Trade, people, new structures going up, figurines being carved, clay cooking stones being shaped, stones being carried from 500 miles away. Then it stopped. There is no single explanation. No evidence of warfare. No sign of a great fire. No evidence of an earthquake or flood. Nothing pointing to mass death or any kind of catastrophe. The people simply left. And after they left, for roughly 1,800 years, nobody came back to this place. From 1100 BCE to 700 CE, there is no evidence of human settlement at Poverty Point. A silence deeper than the deepest swamp. A landscape swallowed by wetland vegetation. Then, around 700 CE, a different Native American group arrived. But these were not the people of Poverty Point. They settled in a small portion of the site, stayed briefly, and left. And then silence again, for thousands more years. Until European farmers arrived in the 1800s. Where did these people go? That question remains unanswered to this day. Some archaeologists connect it to climate change. Around 1100 BCE, a significant drought may have begun affecting the region. The drying of river routes would have collapsed the trade network, and the human community would have dispersed. Others suggest something less dramatic. The poverty point culture didn't vanish. It dissolved into the expanding communities moving south and east across the region. They didn't disappear, they transformed. And perhaps that is the truest answer of all. Because the communities believed to be descended from the people of Poverty Point still exist today. The Chitimacha, Choctaw, and Homa peoples of Louisiana. In their languages, their rituals, their relationship with the land, the traces of Poverty Point may still be carried forward. The legend didn't end. It simply passed into other hands. In 2014, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee gathered in Doha, Qatar. The item on the agenda: the inscription of an archaeological site in Louisiana onto the World Heritage List. The committee reviewed the file. Experts presented their reports, and the decision was unanimous. Poverty Point became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, on the same list as Stonehenge, on the same list as the pyramids, on the same list as the Great Wall of China. And with that decision, archaeologists asked a question that carried a note of shame. Why did it take this long? Because Poverty Point is one of the largest and most significant archaeological sites on Earth. Yet for decades, it was overlooked, overshadowed by the civilizations of Egypt and Europe. The ancient history buried in American soil was never given the attention it deserved. Today, Poverty Point is an open-air state park in West Carroll Parish in northeastern Louisiana. Thousands of visitors come every year. There's a museum, guided tours, walking trails through the mounds, and every year, ongoing excavations, covering less than 1% of the total site, continue to yield new discoveries. Archaeologist Diana Greenlee describes Poverty Point this way. It's a fascinating place, but when you look at the surface, all you see are mounds of dirt. To understand the true scale of what you're looking at, you need imagination. Or you need to rise into the sky. Just as someone did looking at that photograph back in 1953. 3,400 years ago, a group of people on these grounds made a decision. We don't know who they were. We don't know what they called each other. We don't know what language they sang in. But we know this. That decision was made. And after it was made, thousands of people came together. Each one carrying a basket. Each one bending and lifting thousands of times over. They moved earth. They raised ridges. They gave years of their lives, perhaps the entirety of their lives, to shaping this land. Why? Some say for trade. Some say for ceremony. Some say to watch the sky. Some say to stay together. Some say to repair a torn universe. Maybe all of them are right. Maybe none of them are. But here's what I keep coming back to. Whatever the reason was, these people believed in something. They believed in it so completely that they carried 53 million cubic feet of earth in woven baskets. And that belief is still standing today. In the wetlands of Louisiana, beneath the fields of farmers long gone, between the lines left by iron plows, for 3,400 years. Had you ever heard this urban legend before? Share your thoughts in the comments. And under the banner of the urban legends, let's bring the immortal legends of the mortal world into the light together. If you believe this urban legend deserves to be heard by more people, don't forget to like and share. Every legend gives us the chance to meet the soul of the city where it lives. Poverty Point taught us this. Sometimes the greatest civilizations hide in the quietest places. Sometimes understanding the scale of what a people built means you can't just stand on the path they walked. You have to rise a little higher. You have to look a little wider. And remember, you can never truly know what lies beneath the ground you're standing on. A new urban legend is coming soon. Until then, keep your hearts open. Don't walk past the ground beneath your feet without a second thought. And remember, sometimes the greatest legends are right beside you. Mortal World, Immortal Legends.